The coffee in my favorite mug had reached that thoroughly disappointing state of lukewarm stagnation, but I couldn't bring myself to walk the 12 steps back to the microwave. I was too completely and utterly transfixed by the sheer audacity unfolding on my front lawn. I stood there, leaning against the cool glass of my living room window, watching a man who possessed the posture of a retired hall monitor aggressively circling my driveway. The morning sun over Boise, Idaho, was just starting to burn off the early dew, making the perfectly manicured emerald green lawns of the Whispering Pines subdivision glisten like a plastic movie set. And right there, violating the sanctity of this suburban utopia, was my pride and joy. Her name is the Behemoth. She is a 2019 Ford F350 Super Duty with an extended cab, dual rear wheels, a heavy-duty steel utility bed, and a suspension system that looks like it belongs on a military transport. She is perpetually dusted in a fine layer of job site dirt and drywall powder. She is not a vehicle you use to pick up organic kale from the farmer's market. She is a vehicle you use to haul 3 tons of industrial materials across state lines while blasting classic rock. She is my livelihood. I run an independent contracting business, and without that truck, I don't eat. I don't pay my mortgage. I don't get to live in this absurdly expensive neighborhood where the houses all look like they were 3D printed from the same beige template. And then there was Gary. Gary was the president of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. If you looked up middle management complex in the dictionary, you would just find a picture of Gary wearing his signature khaki shorts, a tucked-in pastel polo shirt, and a pair of wraparound sunglasses that he probably thought made him look like a Secret Service agent, but actually just made him look like a very intense youth soccer referee. Right now, Gary was holding a yellow Taylor's tape measure. He was literally measuring the wheelbase of my truck. He would stretch the tape out, squint at the numbers, shake his head in profound disgust, and then scribble something down furiously on the metal clipboard he carried everywhere. I watched him drop to one knee, groaning slightly as his joints popped, to measure the clearance from the pavement to my reinforced steel bumper. I took a slow sip of the terrible coffee, letting the bitterness match my mood. I knew this day was coming. I'd been living in Whispering Pines for exactly 3 weeks, having moved here because the schools were supposedly great and the crime rate was 0, mostly because Gary probably patrolled the streets at night with a flashlight and a citizen's arrest manual. Up until this point, I had been parking the Behemoth in the garage, or at least trying to. It required a 20-point turn, folding the mirrors in, and stopping exactly 3/4 of an inch from the drywall. Yesterday, after a 14-hour shift hauling structural steel, I was just too tired. I parked it in my own driveway. My property. The concrete pad that I pay a mortgage on. Clearly, this was an act of domestic terrorism in Gary's eyes. I set the mug down on the windowsill, took a deep breath to center myself, and unlocked the front door. The hinges gave a slight squeak, which was enough to make Gary snap his head up. He stood up quickly, brushing imaginary dust off his khakis, and puffed out his chest. "Morning, Gary," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Did you lose a contact lens down by my tires, or are you just admiring the suspension?" Gary did not smile. Gary never smiled. Smiling would imply a level of flexibility that his strictly regimented lifestyle did not permit. "This is not a joking matter," he said, his voice a nasal drone that somehow carried perfectly across the humid morning air. He tapped his pen against his clipboard. "We have rules in this community. Covenants, standards. We maintain a certain aesthetic here at Whispering Pines, and this," he gestured grandly toward the Behemoth with a look of pure revulsion, as if it were a pile of rotting garbage. "This industrial monstrosity is in direct violation of Section 4, Paragraph 9 of the bylaws. I stepped out onto the porch, walking slowly down the concrete path toward the driveway. Section 4, Paragraph 9, I repeated, rubbing my chin as if in deep thought. Right. And what exactly does that paragraph say, Gary? Gary's eyes lit up. He lived for this. He lived to quote the bylaws. He flipped a page on his clipboard with an aggressive snap of his wrist. It explicitly states that no commercial vehicles, heavy machinery, trailers, or oversized transport vehicles shall be parked overnight in any driveway, street, or visible exterior location within the subdivision boundaries. They must be enclosed entirely within a standard 2-car residential garage. Gary, I said, stopping a few feet away from him. Look at it. It's a pickup truck. A large pickup truck, sure, but a pickup truck. It has cup holders. It has heated seats. It has a stereo system. I drive it to work, and I drive it home. It has a commercial utility bed, Gary countered, pointing the pen at the steel compartments on the back. It has dual rear wheels. Its gross vehicle weight rating exceeds the neighborhood limit of 8,000 pounds. I just checked the manufacturer specs on my phone. And, he added, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper of accusation, it has mud on it. Mud, I said flatly. In Idaho, where it rained 2 days ago. We expect our residents to utilize the local car washes to maintain neighborhood standards, Gary said, without missing a beat. But the mud is secondary. The primary issue is the vehicle itself. It is a commercial vehicle, pal. It goes or it gets towed. I felt the familiar, hot prickle of anger starting to build in my chest, but I kept my face completely blank. That's the trick with guys like Gary. If you show them you're mad, they win. They feed on your frustration. Gary, I am an independent contractor. I build the infrastructure that allows guys like you to sit in air-conditioned offices all day. Do you want me to carry 3 tons of drywall in a Toyota Prius? Should I strap a pallet of cement bags to the roof of a Honda Civic? Your occupation is irrelevant to the covenants of this homeowners association, Gary replied smoothly, completely unbothered by my logic. When you purchased this property, you signed a legally binding agreement to adhere to the rules. You agreed to maintain the aesthetic integrity of Whispering Pines. Aesthetic integrity, I repeated. I looked around the neighborhood. Every house was painted a variation of desert sand or taupe horizon. Every mailbox was identical. Every tree was pruned into submission. Gary, it's a truck parked in a driveway. It's not a burning tire fire. It's not a meth lab. It's a Ford. It's an eyesore, Gary snapped, finally showing a crack in his bureaucratic armor. It brings down the property values. Mrs. Higgins next door called me at 6:30 this morning because she had to look at this industrial eyesore while she drank her tea. I glanced over at the Higgins house. The curtains in the front window twitched. I raised my hand and gave a little wave. The curtains slammed shut. Well, give Mrs. Higgins my apologies, I said, turning back to Gary. But I can't fit it in the garage without taking the mirrors off every single night. And I'm not doing that. It stays in the driveway. I'm not running a business out of the driveway, I'm just parking my vehicle. Gary took a step closer, invading my personal space. He smelled strongly of peppermint mouthwash and cheap fabric softener. You are not understanding me. This isn't a request. This is a notification of violation. He reached into the pocket of his khaki shorts and pulled out a stack of neon orange stickers. They were those awful industrial-strength warning stickers that use an adhesive formulated by evil scientists specifically to permanently bond with automotive glass. They are designed to shred into 1,000 tiny, frustrating pieces when you try to peel them off. Before I could even process what he was doing, Gary stepped past me, slapped the bright orange sticker right smack in the middle of the driver's side windshield, and smoothed it down with the heel of his hand, pressing all the edges in tight. "Hey!" I yelled, stepping forward. "Don't touch my truck!" Gary took a quick step back, holding his clipboard up like a tiny, pathetic shield. "Do not threaten me. I am acting within my official capacity as the president of this HOA. You have been given formal notice. The sticker clearly states that you have 24 hours to remove the unauthorized commercial vehicle from the premises. If it is not removed by this time tomorrow, it will be towed at the owner's expense. Have a pleasant day." He turned on his heel and began marching briskly down the sidewalk, his white sneakers glaring in the sunlight. I stood there, looking at the neon orange monstrosity ruining the view of my dashboard. The sticker read, in bold black block letters, "Warning. Parking violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle. To be impounded at owner's expense." I reached out and picked at the corner of the sticker with my fingernail. A tiny millimeter-sized flake of orange paper broke off. The adhesive underneath was basically cement. I felt a cold, hard knot of pure, unadulterated spite form in the pit of my stomach. War was officially declared. Who did this guy think he was? He thought a clipboard and a title in a fake little fiefdom gave him the right to mess with my livelihood? He thought he could just stick his aggressively tacky labels on my property, and I would just bow down and park 3 miles away at a Walmart lot? I pulled out my phone and took 3 clear, high-resolution photos of the sticker on the windshield, making sure to get the date and timestamp in the metadata. Then, I took a picture of Gary's retreating back. "All right, Gary," I muttered to myself, walking back up the porch steps. "You want to play by the rules? You want to get technical? Let's see how much you actually love reading the fine print." Honestly, I spent the rest of that afternoon just radiating pure, unadulterated spite. I mean, literally, it took me an hour and a half, a razor blade, and half a bottle of industrial solvent just to scrape Gary's neon orange passive-aggressive love letter off my windshield. By the time the sun started setting over the perfectly synchronized sprinkler systems of whispering pines, I was mentally exhausted. But I was also, completely wired. You know that feeling when you just know something is about to go down? I didn't trust Gary. Guys who wear their shirts tucked into their shorts on a Tuesday do not just issue warnings and wait patiently. They escalate. I went to bed around midnight, but I didn't actually sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the hum of the central AC, waiting. And honestly, it's a good thing I did, because right around 2 in the morning, the quiet suburban silence was completely shattered. It wasn't a loud crash. It was worse. It was the heavy, metallic clank of thick steel chains hitting concrete, followed immediately by the low, guttural rumble of a heavy-duty diesel engine reversing up my driveway. I literally flew out of bed. I didn't even grab pants. I just bolted out the front door in my boxers and a faded gray t-shirt, my bare feet slapping against the cold, damp concrete of the front porch. And there it was. A massive, heavily dented, rust-spotted tow truck was backed aggressively right up to the rear bumper of the Behemoth. The side of the tow truck had faded, peeling decals that read, "Scrap and Snatch Towing." 24-hour service, which, is just the most predatory name for a business I've ever heard. The driver was already out of the cab. He was a big guy, wearing a grease-stained high-visibility vest over a hoodie, and he had a giant wad of chewing tobacco tucked firmly into his lower lip. He was dragging a heavy chain toward the rear axle of my truck. "Hey, get the hell away from my truck!" I screamed, sprinting down the driveway and literally throwing myself between the tow operator and my back tires. The tow guy didn't even flinch. He just spit a stream of brown liquid onto Gary's precious aesthetic concrete and glared at me. "Move, buddy. I got a job to do." "You are trespassing on private property, and you are trying to steal my vehicle," I yelled, my heart hammering in my chest like a jackhammer. "Drop the chain, right now." "Look, pal," the driver grunted, his voice sounding like it was filtered through a carton of cheap cigarettes. "I got a signed work order from the property management and the HOA board. Your little truck here is in violation. I'm hooking it up and I'm taking it to the yard. You can either move out of the way, or I am literally going to run you over. Your choice." "Do it," I said, leaning back against the cold steel of the Behemoth's tailgate and crossing my arms. I mean, my knees were shaking, but I wasn't about to let this guy take my livelihood in the middle of the night. "Run me over. Let's see how that works out for your insurance premiums, assuming a sketchy operation like Scrap and Snatch even has insurance." The guy let out a heavy sigh, dropping the chain onto the driveway with a loud clang. "Listen, I don't get paid enough to argue with guys in their underwear. I'm taking the truck." He reached for the control levers on the side of his rig to start lowering the wheel lift. "Don't touch that lever," I shouted, pulling my cell phone out of my pocket. "I am dialing 911 right now. You are attempting grand theft auto." "Call 'em," he scoffed, leaning against his rig. "It's a civil matter. Cops won't do squat. They'll tell you the exact same thing. HOA has a contract with us. You broke the rules, you pay the piper." I hit send. "Yeah, hi, 911? I need an officer at 442 Cypress Lane immediately. There is a man trespassing on my property attempting to steal my work vehicle. Yes, he's threatening me. Yes, I am blocking the vehicle." For the next 10 minutes, it was just a completely absurd standoff. Me, standing barefoot in my boxers, shivering in the cool Idaho night air, guarding my truck. The tow guy, angrily pacing back and forth, spitting tobacco juice onto the driveway and aggressively revving his engine just to try and intimidate me. All around us, the neighborhood was waking up. I could see porch lights flicking on up and down the street. I literally saw Mrs. Higgins standing on her front porch in a floral bathrobe, clutching a cordless phone to her chest, like she was witnessing a murder. Finally, the flashing red and blue lights of a Boise Police Department cruiser came sweeping around the corner, painting the beige houses in chaotic bursts of color. The cruiser pulled up to the curb, partially blocking the tow truck, and a lone officer stepped out. Enter Officer Davis. He looked young, maybe 25, and he had the deeply exhausted aura of a man who was 4 hours into a 12-hour night shift and had already dealt with way too much nonsense. He slowly walked up the driveway, resting his hand casually on his duty belt, looking back and forth between me and my underwear and the tow truck driver. "All right," Officer Davis sighed, his breath visible in the chilly air. "Somebody want to tell me why I'm getting noise complaints and grand theft auto calls at 2:15 in the morning over a parking dispute?" "Officer, thank God," I said, stepping forward but keeping my back firmly against my truck. "This man is trespassing. He came onto my private driveway in the middle of the night and is trying to illegally impound my vehicle." "It ain't illegal," the tow truck driver barked, waving a crumpled piece of paper in the air. "I got a contract. Whispering Pines HOA, Section 4, Paragraph 9 violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle. The HOA president, some guy named Gary, signed the impound order this afternoon. I'm just executing the order." Officer Davis rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking like he wanted to be literally anywhere else in the world. "Okay, look, guys. This is a civil matter, sir." He looked at me. "If you live in an HOA and you signed the covenants, they generally have the legal authority to enforce their parking regulations, including towing. I can't stop him from doing his job if he has the proper paperwork." "It's my private driveway," I argued, my voice echoing a little too loudly down the street. "They can't just steal my property in the middle of the night without a court order." "Actually," Officer Davis said patiently but firmly, "if the HOA covenants specify that they can, then they can. It's a contract dispute. If you feel they are acting illegally, You have to take it up with the HOA board tomorrow, or file a civil suit in small claims court. But right now, if he has the authorized tow order, you need to step away from the vehicle. If you interfere with a lawful tow, I will have to arrest you for breach of peace. I really honestly don't want to do that. I felt a cold wave of panic wash over me. I couldn't lose the truck. If it went to the impound lot, I'd lose the whole day tomorrow just trying to bail it out. Plus, I'd be hit with like a $500 tow fee, storage fees, and whatever ridiculous fine Gary decided to tack on. Plus, my tools were in there. "Show me the paperwork," I demanded, pointing at the tow driver. "If this is a legal, authorized tow, show me the order." The driver sneered. "I don't gotta show you anything." "Actually, yeah, you do," Officer Davis chimed in, shining his heavy tactical flashlight onto the driver. "If you're executing an impound from private property, the property owner has the right to review the authorization." The driver muttered a string of curses under his breath, stomped over, and practically shoved the crumpled yellow carbon copy paper into my chest. I took it, squinting in the harsh glare of the police flashlight. My brain was racing. I needed a flaw. I needed a technicality. I needed anything. I read through the standard boilerplate text. Whispering Pines HOA. Violation. Commercial vehicle. Authorized by Gary Miller, President. Then I looked at the vehicle description. Make, Ford. Model, F350. Color, white. License plate, ID, 788XYZ. I stared at the plate number. Then I turned my head and looked at the rear license plate of my truck, illuminated perfectly by the officer's flashlight. My license plate read, ID 788XY5. I mean, I literally almost started laughing right there on the spot. Gary, in his self-righteous, clipboard-wielding fury this afternoon, had miswritten the very last letter of my license plate number. And Z'd instead of a V. "Well, Officer Davis," I said, handing the paper back to the tow driver with a massive, incredibly smug smile spreading across my face. "It looks like we have a massive legal problem here." "What's the problem?" Davis asked, stepping closer. "The problem," I said, pointing dramatically at the paperwork in the driver's hand, "is that this tow order is for a white Ford F350 with the Idaho license plate 788XYZ. If you look at my vehicle, my legal state registration is 788XY-FUN. Therefore, this impound order is completely invalid. This gentleman is attempting to tow a vehicle he has absolutely no legal authorization to touch." The tow driver froze. He looked at the paper. He looked at the truck. He looked back at the paper. "It's a typo, bro. It's the same truck. White Ford, dual rear wheels, parked at the exact address on the slip." "A typo?" I asked, putting my hands on my hips. "Officer Davis, as an agent of the law, would you agree that a legal document authorizing the seizure of private property needs to be explicitly and entirely accurate? Because if he hooks up a vehicle that does not perfectly match the legal description on that impound order, that is no longer a civil matter. That is literal vehicle theft." Officer Davis let out a long, slow breath that turned into a cloud of mist. He walked over, grabbed the paper from the driver, walked to the back of my truck, and checked the plate. He shook his head. "He's right," Davis said, handing the paper back to the tow driver. "The plate numbers don't match. The order is invalid." "Are you kidding me?" the driver exploded, throwing his arms up. "It's one letter. It's obviously the same freaking truck. The HOA guy wrote it down wrong." "Doesn't matter," Davis said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into his authoritative cop voice. "The law is the law. If you hook up to a vehicle that isn't on your authorized work order, I am going to arrest you for attempted auto theft. Drop the chain, pack up your rig, and leave. Now. The driver stared at Davis for a long, tense moment. He knew he was beaten. He angrily spit another stream of tobacco onto the concrete, kicked the tire of his own rig, and picked up the heavy chain. "You got lucky tonight, buddy," the driver snarled at me as he tossed the chain back onto the bed of the tow truck. "But I'll be back tomorrow night, with the right paperwork, and I'm gonna laugh when I drag this piece of junk to the yard." "I'll leave the porch light on for you, Dwayne," I yelled back as he climbed into the cab and slammed the door. I stood there, watching the tow truck pull away, the diesel engine roaring in frustration as it disappeared down the suburban street. Officer Davis walked back to his cruiser. "Thanks, officer," I said, genuinely meaning it. "Don't thank me," Davis replied, pausing with his hand on his car door. "He's right. The HOA will just issue a corrected slip tomorrow. You bought yourself 24 hours, maybe less. If I were you, I'd find somewhere else to park that thing, or you're going to be dealing with this every single night." He got in his car, turned off the flashing lights, and drove away, leaving me standing alone in my driveway in my boxers, the adrenaline slowly starting to drain out of my system, replaced by a cold, hard dread. Davis was right. I won the battle, but Gary was absolutely going to win the war. Tomorrow, he would just print a new slip, double-check the license plate, and the tow truck would be back. And the cops wouldn't stop them next time. I couldn't stand guard over my truck 24 hours a day. I had to go to work. I had to live my life. I walked back inside the house and locked the door. It was almost 3 a.m. I was wide awake. The adrenaline had me vibrating at a frequency that could probably shatter glass. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the coffee maker, and just stood there in the dark, watching the cheap machine sputter and brew. There had to be a way. I mean, honestly, there is always a way. I refuse to be bullied out of my own driveway by a guy who measures grass clippings for a hobby. If Gary wanted to play the technicality game, if he wanted to use the exact letter of the rules to force his will on the neighborhood, then I just had to find a bigger rule book. I grabbed a mug of the fresh, scalding black coffee and walked into my home office. I fired up my computer. The blue light from the monitor illuminated the dark room. I cracked my knuckles, took a massive gulp of the coffee, and opened up a web browser. I started simple. I pulled up the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association Declaration of Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. It was a PDF document that was like 70 pages long. I scrolled down to Section 4, Paragraph 9. No commercial vehicles, heavy machinery, trailers, or used oversized transport vehicles shall be parked overnight in any driveway, street, or visible exterior location within the subdivision boundaries. They must be enclosed entirely within a standard 2-car residential garage. It was ironclad. Gary wasn't making it up. I signed this document when I bought the house. In the eyes of civil law, I was in breach of contract. They had every right to tow me. But HOA covenants aren't the highest law in the land. They are at the bottom of the legal food chain. They can be overridden by city ordinances, which can be overridden by state laws, which are ultimately crushed by federal regulations. I started searching. I typed in Boise, Idaho municipal parking codes. I read through pages of zoning laws, residential parking permits, and street sweeping regulations. Nothing helped. The city codes generally deferred to private property management when it came to driveway enforcement. The clock on the bottom right of my screen ticked over to 4 a.m. My eyes were burning. I was on my second cup of coffee. I started getting desperate. I typed in federal exemptions for commercial vehicles parked at residences, and then I found it. I mean, literally, it was like the clouds parted, and a choir of heavily tattooed trucker angels started singing in my office. I stumbled onto a legal forum discussing the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, FMCSA, and Department of Transportation, DOT, regulations regarding interstate commerce. Specifically, I found a deeply obscure legal precedent regarding commercial dispatch and freight receiving zones. Here was the loophole, and it was so beautiful it almost brought a tear to my eye. According to federal DOT regulations, any business entity, like an LLC, engaged in interstate commerce has the federal right to designate a specific location as an active freight receiving and loading zone for the staging and transfer of commercial goods. Because the federal government really cares about the uninterrupted flow of commerce across state lines, these designated loading zones are protected by federal interstate commerce laws. But here was the kicker. I cross-referenced this federal law with Boise City Code Title 11, Zoning Ordinances. Boise has a specific, weird little municipal variance designed to protect small, home-based manufacturing businesses. Title 11 stated that a residential property could be temporarily zoned for commercial loading and unloading, provided that the property owner registered the space, paid a municipal variance fee, and, this was the most important part, marked the loading zone according to federal DOT safety standards. If you did all that, local residential parking ordinances, and by legal extension, private HOA covenants, were completely superseded by the federal protection of interstate commerce during active loading phases. An HOA cannot legally interfere with, fine, or tow a commercial vehicle that is actively engaged in loading or unloading freight in a federally and municipally recognized commercial loading zone. Doing so isn't a civil contract dispute anymore. It's a federal offense. It's tampering with commercial freight. My brain was spinning. I started pacing around the office. Could I do this? Could I literally turn my suburban driveway into a federally protected industrial loading dock? I looked at the requirements. Requirement 1. I needed an LLC registered at this address. Easy. I already had my contracting business, but I wanted something specific for this. I sat back down at the computer, went to the Idaho Secretary of State's website, and paid the $100 expedited filing fee to register a new entity, Behemoth Freight and Logistics, LLC. Requirement 2. I needed to file the municipal variance with the city of Boise under Title 11. I found the online portal for the city planning department. It was a confusing, archaic web form that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1998. But I managed to fill it out, claiming a temporary home-based freight staging requirement. I paid the $50 municipal variance application fee. Since it was an automated system for temporary variances, the provisional permit was auto-generated and emailed to me as a PDF instantly. Requirement 3. This was the big one. The space had to be marked according to federal DOT safety standards. I looked up the FMCSA handbook. A commercial loading zone cannot just be a normal concrete driveway. It must have clear, high-visibility perimeter markings. Specifically, it required highly reflective, industrial-grade yellow crosshatch striping over the designated loading area and proper permanent signage warning unauthorized vehicles away from the federal zone. I looked out my office window at my driveway. Gary loved that driveway. The HOA bylaws specifically mandated that all driveways must maintain a natural, concrete, or approved neutral aggregate aesthetic. If I painted DOT-regulated, highly reflective yellow crosshatches all over my driveway, Gary would literally have a stroke. He would burst into flames on my front lawn. And the best part? If the city approved my Title 11 variance, the HOA couldn't do a damn thing about the paint because it was a government-mandated safety marking for an approved commercial zone. Federal safety regulations trump neighborhood aesthetic guidelines every single time. It was 5:30 in the morning. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a pale gray light over the perfectly manicured, aggressively boring houses of Whispering Pines. I wasn't tired anymore. I was energized by the pure, toxic thrill of malicious compliance. I had the LLC. I had the provisional city variants. Now I just needed the paint. I couldn't do it myself. It had to meet commercial code, or the loophole would fall apart under scrutiny. I needed a professional. I pulled out my phone and started searching for local commercial paving and striping contractors. I needed someone who was crazy enough to come to a high-end residential neighborhood on a moment's notice and turn a pristine driveway into a Walmart loading dock. Honestly, I was about to ruin Gary's entire life, and I couldn't wait to eat. By 7 in the morning, I had already downed 3 more cups of coffee and found the one man in the greater Boise area who possessed both the heavy machinery and the profound lack of moral reluctance required for this job. His name was Big Mike, owner and sole proprietor of Apex Industrial Striping and Paving. When I called his shop line, he answered on the second ring over the deafening roar of a diesel generator. I laid out the situation with total honesty. I told him I was in a war with my HOA. I had a municipal Title 11 variance provisional permit in my inbox, and I needed my residential driveway turned into a fully compliant, high-visibility Department of Transportation certified commercial loading zone before the afternoon sun went down. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he was going to tell me to kick rocks. Then, Big Mike let out a booming, phlegmy laugh that nearly blew out the speaker on my phone. "Kid," Mike said, his voice sounding like a concrete mixer full of gravel, "I have been fighting with my own HOA over my asphalt roller for 6 years. I will be at your house in 45 minutes. Have a thermos of black coffee ready and get out of my way." He wasn't lying. At precisely 7:42 a.m., a battered, bright orange flatbed truck dragged a massive trailer down the peaceful, pristine pavement of Cypress Lane. The truck was hauling a trailer loaded with high-pressure motorized paint sprayers, stencils, concrete prep grinding tools, and 2 commercial-grade thermal paint melters. The noise alone sounded like a jet engine warming up on the tarmac. Up and down Cypress Lane, garage doors started opening like defensive shields. Front blinds twitched. Mrs. Higgins actually stepped out onto her porch in her slippers, holding a pair of gardening shears like a defensive weapon, staring in absolute terror at the orange industrial monster idling in my driveway. Big Mike climbed down from the cab. He was roughly 6'4", wore a neon lime construction vest held together by zip ties, and had a mustache that could double as a push broom. He walked up my driveway, looked at the pristine, stamped concrete, and then looked at me. "So," Mike said, folding his massive arms over his belly, "you want me to lay down DOT yellow on this purty little driveway?" "I don't just want you to lay it down, Mike," I said, handing him the printed PDF of the Federal FMCSA Safety Handbook and my city variants. "I need it fully compliant, 5-inch reflective yellow border lines, 45-degree diagonal crosshatches spanning the entire pad. And I need a heavy-duty steel core signpost sunk right there next to the flower bed with a custom aluminum sign." Mike squinted at the city paperwork, then looked at the handbook specs. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, hidden mostly under his mustache. "Let me get this straight," Mike chuckles, shaking his head in sheer awe. "You want me to paint DOT-regulated, highly reflective, commercial-grade, yellow crosshatches over your entire custom-stamped neutral aggregate driveway, right next to the HOA president's pristine lawn?" "Yes, Mike," I said, pulling out my checkbook. "And I need that heavy-gauge aluminum sign planted right next to the petunias to read, 'Unauthorized vehicles subject to immediate federal impound and interstate commerce fines.'" Mike wiped a tear of pure joy from his eye. "You are completely out of your mind, son. I love it. I'm charging you $1,200 because I gotta use the fast-drying, rubberized traffic paint that cures in 2 hours, and because I'm gonna take 1,000,000 pictures of this for my website. Deal, I said. Within 10 minutes, my quiet suburban front yard was transformed into a full-blown construction zone. Mike's crew hauled out the motorized concrete surface prep tools. The high-pitched whine of the diamond blade scarifiers echoed off the beige stucco walls of the neighboring houses. They were stripping the top sealant off the concrete so the yellow paint would chemically bond to the driveway forever. I was standing on the porch, watching the magic happen, when I heard the unmistakable screech of bicycle brakes. It was Gary. He had ridden up on his high-end 15-speed hybrid road bike, wearing a lime green helmet and matching padded cycling shorts. He dropped the bike right onto my lawn, practically trembling with rage, his clipboard clutched tightly in his white-knuckled hand. "Stop! Stop this immediately!" Gary screamed, trying to shout over the roar of the concrete grinder. Big Mike didn't even look up from his machine. He just revved the engine higher, sending a cloud of concrete dust drifting directly over Gary's pristine custom bike. Gary marched up to me on the porch, his face turning a deep, dangerous shade of purple. "What is the meaning of this? Are you insane?" he shrieked. "You are destroying the aesthetic integrity of this entire neighborhood. You are grinding up your concrete. What are those tools?" "Morning, Gary," I yelled back, smiling warmly. "Just doing some routine property maintenance, upgrading the infrastructure." "I am issuing an emergency HOA cease and desist," Gary yelled, slapping a blank violation form onto his clipboard and scribbling frantically. "Section 2, Paragraph 1. Alteration of exterior structures without architecture review committee approval. You are looking at a $500 a day fine, pal. I will have an injunction on your house by noon." I leaned over the porch railing, looking down at him with pure pity. "Gary, I'd be real careful about issuing fines right now. You see, this isn't an architectural alteration. This is a government-mandated safety installation." "A what?" Gary roared. "I filed for a Title 11 municipal variance with the city of Boise this morning," I said, pulling a copy of the stamped city approval from my back pocket and fluttering it in the breeze. "My LLC, Behemoth Freight and Logistics, is officially operating a temporary dispatch and receiving node right here. Under federal DOT guidelines, all commercial loading zones must feature high-visibility perimeter markings and regulatory signage. Mike here is just bringing me into full compliance with state and federal law." Gary stared at the paper in my hand. His eyes bulged. He looked like his brain was trying to process a paradox that threatened to collapse his entire reality. You can't do that. This is a residential zone. The covenants are legally superseded by Title 11 and interstate commerce regulations during active operations," I interrupted smoothly. "If you interfere with the application of mandatory safety markings required by municipal variance, you are committing a misdemeanor interference with public infrastructure work. Do you want to take that up with the city zoning board, Gary? Because they open at 9. Gary stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at me, then looked at Big Mike, who was currently firing up a giant paint applicator loaded with bright, glowing, industrial yellow paint. "You're bluffing," Gary hissed, pointing a finger at me. "You think you're clever with your little legal tricks? My tow contractor has the revised impound slip. The license plate is corrected. He'll be here at noon. The second he gets here, your illegal truck is going to the yard, and you're going to pay for every inch of damage you're doing to this concrete." Gary turned, jumped on his bike, and pedaled away so hard his legs were a blur, his clipboard flapping wildly under his arm. "Nice guy," Big Mike yelled over the noise, lowering his welding mask. "Ready for the paint?" "Light it up, Mike," I said. For the next 3 hours, I watched a master at work. Big Mike and his team sprayed thick, rubberized, bright yellow traffic paint across my driveway. They laid down crisp 45-degree crosshatches that looked like they belonged in the loading bay of an international airport. They mixed tiny glass beads into the wet paint, the kind that retro-reflect headlight beams, so the driveway literally glowed under the sun. Then, Mike pulled out a heavy steel post driver and planted a 4-inch-wide galvanized steel post deep into the soil right beside my flower bed, snapping 2 roots of Mrs. Higgins' adjacent hedge in the process. He bolted a heavy aluminum sign to the top of the post. It was glorious. The sign was bright red, white, and yellow. It featured the official DOT freight symbol and read in stark, unyielding block letters, "Notice: Federally Registered Commercial Loading Zone. Behemoth Freight and Logistics, LLC. Unauthorized parking or interference with freight staging is a direct violation of 49 U.S.C. Sect. 14101. Violators subject to immediate federal impound and civil penalties up to $10,000. How's that look, boss? Mike asked, wiping sweat from his forehead and admiring his handiwork. Mike, I said, feeling a tear of pure triumph welling up in my eye. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. By 11:30 a.m., the paint was dry to the touch. The Behemoth was parked precisely in the center of the glowing yellow crosshatches. But I needed one final piece of the puzzle. The law stated that the federal loading zone protections only applied during active freight staging. So I went into my garage, grabbed a single, small, empty cardboard box that used to hold a toaster, and walked out to my truck. I dropped the empty box right into the center of the giant, heavy-duty steel bed of the Behemoth. There, freight was officially staged for transport. The zone was active. The trap was set. I set up 2 high-definition security cameras on my porch railings, angling them directly at the driveway and the brand-new sign. Then, I pulled a folding lawn chair onto my porch, grabbed a cold can of lemonade, and sat down to wait. I didn't have to wait long. At exactly 12:05 p.m., the heavy diesel engine of Dwayne's scrap and snatch tow truck came rumbling around the corner. Trailing right behind the tow truck in his shiny beige Lexus SUV was Gary. Gary pulled up to the curb, killed the engine, and practically leaped out of his car, holding his clipboard high like a battle standard. Dwayne backed the tow truck right up to the foot of my driveway, stopping just short of the glowing yellow lines. Dwayne stepped out of the cab, dragging his heavy steel chains, looking meaner and dustier than he had at 2 a.m. "All right, clever guy," Dwayne shouted up to the porch, a fresh wad of tobacco bulging in his cheek. "Got the right plate number today. 788.5. Step aside, or I'm hauling this beast away and charging you double for the night call." I didn't get up from my lawn chair. I just took a slow sip of lemonade, raised my glass to him, and said, "I wouldn't cross that yellow line if I were you, Dwayne." "Oh, shut up," Gary yelled, marching right up to the edge of the driveway. "Your fake paint doesn't mean anything. This is a private residential neighborhood. Dwayne, hook the truck up right now. I authorize the immediate removal." Dwayne grunted, hoisted the heavy iron hook over his shoulder, and took 3 aggressive steps onto the glowing yellow crosshatches toward the rear axle of the Behemoth. "Dwayne," I said, pointing up at the corner of my house, "you are currently on 4K high-definition video. The moment that hook touches my chassis, you are actively interfering with an interstate commercial freight transfer." Dwayne paused, looking up at the sign planted in my petunias. He read the words "federally registered" and 49 U.S.C. 14,101. A tiny flicker of hesitation crossed his face. "Hey, Gary, what the hell is this sign?" "It's a scam! It's a bluff!" Gary screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "He put it up this morning without permission. Hook the truck." "Hook it, Dwayne," I encouraged him from the porch, leaning forward with a smile. "Go ahead. Touch the truck. Let's see what happens when the Department of Transportation gets involved in an illegal seizure of active commercial cargo. Dwayne looked at Gary, then looked at the sign, then looked at the glowing yellow paint under his boots. Man, I ain't getting wrapped up in no federal junk. You told me this was a basic HOA impound. It is a basic HOA impound, Gary shrieked, his face turning a dark, blotchy purple. I am the president of this association. I command you to tow this vehicle. You don't command squat, Gary, I yelled down, finally standing up from my chair. And to make sure everything is completely above board, I took the liberty of inviting a mutual friend to oversee this transaction. Right on cue, a Boise Police Department cruiser pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching softly on the asphalt. Officer Davis stepped out of the vehicle. He looked at the glowing yellow driveway. He looked at the massive steel sign in the flower bed. He looked at me, sitting on the porch with my lemonade. Then, he let out a sigh so heavy it sounded like a tire deflating. Please tell me you guys aren't doing this again, Davis groaned, walking up the walkway. Officer! Gary practically threw himself at Davis. Thank God you're here. This resident has completely vandalized his property, installed illegal commercial signage, and is refusing to comply with a lawful HOA towing order. Arrest him! Arrest him for vandalism! Officer Davis held up a hand. Calm down, Mr. Miller. Nobody is arresting anybody yet. Davis turned his eyes toward me. All right, host. What am I looking at here? Officer Davis, I said, walking down the porch steps with a thick blue folder in my hand. What you are looking at is an officially registered municipal commercial loading zone, established under Boise City Code, Title 11, cross-referenced with federal FMCSA regulations for interstate logistics. Here is the city variance approval, here is the state filing for Behemoth Freight and Logistics, LLC, and here is the proof of active freight staging. I handed the folder to Davis. Davis opened it, scanning the official city stamps and the legal codes I had spent 4 hours highlighting in neon yellow. As he read, his eyes got wider and wider. He looked up from the folder, looked at the glowing yellow crosshatches, looked at the cardboard toaster box in the back of my truck, and then slowly turned his head to look at Gary. Is this real? Davis asked, pointing at the city variance stamp. It is 100% legal and active, officer, I said firmly. As long as that variance is active and the freight is staged, this driveway is designated as a commercial infrastructure node. Under federal law, local parking enforcement, including private HOA towing contracts, is entirely preempted during operational hours. This is absurd, Gary yelled, trying to grab the folder out of Davis's hands. Davis slapped his hand away. He put a cardboard box in his truck. That's not freight. That's a box. According to FMCSA definition 390.5, I cited off the top of my head, freight is defined as any commercial goods, packaged or unpackaged, staged for transport by a registered commercial entity. The size of the cargo is irrelevant under federal law, Gary. Officer Davis let out a long, wheezing breath that turned into a quiet laugh. He looked at Dwayne, the tow truck driver. Dwayne, Officer Davis said, his voice completely flat. Yeah, officer? Dwayne asked nervously, stepping back toward his rig. If you drop your chains on that truck, or if you touch a single tire on this property, Davis said, pointing at the yellow line, I am going to arrest you on the spot for felony interference with commercial transport, and I am calling the state troopers to impound your tow truck. Dwayne didn't hesitate for a single second. He dropped the heavy steel chains onto the pavement, sprinted back to his cab, threw the rig in gear, and took off down Cypress Lane so fast his rear tires chirped on the asphalt, leaving a trail of black rubber on the street. Dwayne, come back here! Dwayne! Gary screamed, chasing after the tow truck for 10 yards before stopping, out of breath, his clipboard falling out of his hands and clattering uselessly onto the pavement. Gary turned back toward us, his chest heaving, his face a horrifying shade of crimson. You can't get away with this! I will sue you! I will call the city council! I will call the governor! Go right ahead, Gary, I said, stepping right up to the edge of my yellow line, crossing my arms smugly. The City Council is the one that issued the Title 11 variants. And until you can convince the United States Congress to rewrite the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Act, my truck stays right here, on my bright, shiny DOT-certified yellow driveway. Officer Davis handed my folder back to me, shaking his head with a look of profound, hilarious respect. Have a nice day, gentlemen. Try not to call me again unless somebody actually breaks a federal law. Davis turned on his heel, walked back to his cruiser, and pulled away. Gary stood alone at the edge of my driveway. He looked at the giant sign. He looked at the glowing yellow lines that would now permanently grace the center of his precious manicured neighborhood. He looked at me. You ruined the neighborhood, Gary whispered, his voice trembling with pure, unadulterated defeat. No, Gary, I said softly, taking a long sip of my lemonade. I just upgraded the logistics. Gary didn't say another word. He picked up his battered clipboard from the street, climbed back into his beige Lexus, and slowly drove away, his shoulders slumped in absolute, total humiliation. Over the next 3 months, Gary tried everything. The HOA tried to fine me $10,000 for the yellow paint. I immediately filed an administrative appeal with the Boise Zoning Board, pointing out that fining a resident for government-mandated safety markings on a state-recognized commercial variance was a direct violation of municipal code. The City Zoning Board threatened to pull Whispering Pines' master community permit if the HOA didn't back down. The board folded overnight. 2 weeks later, Gary resigned as HOA president, citing personal health reasons. The new HOA president, a remarkably chill guy named Dave, who lived down the street and owned a boat, immediately amended the bylaws to allow personal pickup trucks in driveways, provided they weren't leaking oil. I eventually let the Title 11 municipal variants expire after 6 months, but I never scraped the yellow paint off the driveway. I kept it right there as a permanent monument to what happens when you try to mess with a man's livelihood using a clipboard and a power trip. Every morning, I walk out onto my porch, take a sip of my lukewarm coffee, look at my giant Ford F350 sitting comfortably inside her glowing yellow crosshatches, and smile. So, what did we learn today? If someone tries to take your truck using the fine print, you don't fight the fine print. You just find a bigger book